Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Yes, our first presenter this morning is Julie McFarlane from the Oregon Health Authority.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, I hope that's okay. Hello, I'm Julie McFarlane, and I'm from Portland, Oregon. And if you've seen the program Portlandia, you know that in Portland we consider ourselves foodies. We love food, we love cooking, we love talking about food, where it comes from, how it was grown. We like to use words like free range, gluten-free, vegan, locally grown in our conversations. And before we eat our chicken, we want to know what his name was and if he led a happy life. Like a true Portlander, I get my organic, locally sourced soup delivered to me once a week by bicycle by a business called Soup Cycle. So you're probably asking, okay, so what does being a foodie and soup have to do with a statewide prevention strategy for sexual violence? Well, Oregon's statewide sexual violence prevention strategy is a bit like making soup. Now, I've been around a while. I'm one of the longest running RPE directors. I won't say how long, but back in the day, in the olden times, when I first began, times were hard in the world of primary prevention of sexual violence. We really didn't have much going on except hotlines and shelters. No one had a statewide plan. Evaluation and the principles of primary prevention were not yet on the horizon. I'm guessing most of you are familiar with the story of stone soup. It's told in many cultures in Europe and the United States, and I used to read a Mexican version called Cactus Soup to my kids. So the story goes that when a community is hungry and no one has enough for a whole meal, you start with just water and a stone for soup, and you make your broth, and that's what you start with. So what do us foodies in Oregon do when we're hungry and there's nothing to eat? Well, we make stone soup. The beginning of our stone soup was the RPE grant. We simmered the water and the stone that was RPE for a number of years. When we talked to our partners at first, they said they had nothing to share. Both public and private were reluctant to admit they had even vegetables or spices to share. They had never tasted stone soup, so they had no idea how delicious and nourishing it could be. They were scared to give up what little they had. Maybe they weren't hungry yet, but we knew eventually they would be. So we warmed up the RPE program, we stirred it around, we added some salt and pepper. We tried to make it as nourishing as possible, but that was all we had. Eventually, we brought together partners to create our first statewide sexual violence prevention plan. The plan proved to be our first recipe. Everyone started to see they had a role to play and something to contribute in creating the soup. The process of making the soup, or our plan, was just as important as the final product. The soup was starting to taste better, but it needed some flavor. The Oregon Sexual Assault Task Force and their Prevention Education Committee began sharing our plan with many partners and building interest statewide. More partners began to imagine a better tasting soup. Rather than hiding their prized chicken and vegetables, if you will, they began coming forward and seeing what a delicious and nourishing meal we could all have if we just joined forces. A few of the grants which offered some fiber and greens to our soup was our Strive funds, which is Striving to Reduce Youth Violence Everywhere, which went to our biggest county. Our Title V Maternal and Child Health Block Grant, which promotes safe and nurturing relationships across the life course. a Project Connect grant from Futures Without Violence, which promoted access to reproductive health services and promoted safe and healthy relationships. Cuídate, an HIV prevention program for youth that addresses dating violence. We were starting to feel like we really had a meal now. We were also able to pass some legislation called the Healthy Teens Relationship Act that addresses teen dating violence in the schools. But as you know, there's always more cooking to be done. We're constantly having to adjust the recipe. Grants end, and we need to find new partners and new ingredients. Currently, we have a couple of new partners that are hungry. For example, Oregon's injury program smelled the broth cooking and actually had some meat to offer. They recently wrote into their core injury grant work some work to address sexual violence prevention. This will start with the Sexuality Education and Sexual Violence Prevention Summit this fall. The summit will be an opportunity to identify and discuss resources in our state that can complement and strengthen our RPE grant and promote healthy relationships among youth. Now, some of this work may not look purely like sexual violence prevention work to you. But if you look closer, many of the challenges and outcomes are the same. Some things that we've learned is that healthy sexuality education is sexual violence prevention work. That promoting safe and nurturing relationships across the lifespan is sexual violence prevention work. Reducing all kinds of teen dating violence is sexual violence prevention work. That promoting access to reproductive health services is sexual violence prevention work. These are all ingredients. So now you don't just throw all the ingredients together and turn up the heat. That could be a disaster. So a real chef will look at how the ingredients enhance and complement each other to make the perfect recipe. They also need to be added to the soup at just the right time. We're still playing around with our recipe and making adjustments to make it delicious and nourishing. And this is what I'll be addressing in my breakout session. So is your state hungry? I bet you have some partners that have some ingredients that would make a good stone soup. What recipe would you use? What ingredients does your state have? Do you want to make a chowder, or a chili, or a stew, or a gumbo? Come to my session. We can share ideas about how other programs and grants work together with RBE to create a more meaningful sexual violence prevention work statewide. And remember, you don't need to eat with a silver spoon to be nourished. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CalCasa.org.